Hi, Jason and Shelley here for another kitchen conversation. This is number two, and what we want to talk about today is the early days. And as we said last time, we're talking about the frequently asked questions, and one of those is, what were the early days like? Post-disclosure, the days, weeks, and months. What was it like around your house? So that's what we want to talk about, and I'll let you lead off.
Okay. When I think about, even those first days after you told me the truth, I think one, I was in a ton of shock. I also very quickly that turned into my emotions being really out of control. Sometimes I would love you and be enamored by you, and other times I would, hate you and
Yeah.
and not want to be around you. But a couple of things early on that I think were so helpful for us. One was getting into counseling and finding a counselor that wasn't the first counselor we went to, but finding a counselor that really was a good fit for us.
Yeah, that was huge.
And number two was me finding another wife that was going down a similar road, and meeting her and us being able to meet weekly or every other week to really just share exactly what was on our heart, and just understanding each other.
Yeah, yeah, you didn't feel like you were alone and the only one going through this.
Exactly.
Yeah, same for me in terms of support. My accountability partners, really James, Kurt, and Scott, they walked with me through this, and I wouldn't have made it without them. I mean, there are times when I felt like cashing it in because it was so hard in those early days, so hard to be present with all that pain, and they helped me stick it out. And so I don't think I would have made it without their support.
Yeah.
Speaking of that presence in your pain, those early days were really hard with consecutive days and evenings of screaming, yelling, hurtful words, rhetorical questions. How could you? Why would you? All those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
Like hours upon hours of us sitting face to face talking about this really, really hard stuff.
Mm-hmm.
If we wouldn't have done that, we wouldn't be here today.
Right. Right.
I feel like that's something that is so hard for so many couples. We didn't have kids when everything hit the fan, so that made it a little different for us. But for so many couples, it's so hard for them to dedicate the time to talk through what needs to be talked through.
Mm-hmm.
Crazy schedules and lives.
Mm-hmm.
But without that, it's going to be really hard to get the healing that you're looking for.
Yeah. Well, and I think that was 9 years ago when we started doing that. That was the beginning of a foundation for us to continue to do that. And sure, it's ebbed and flowed through the years, but I think we're realizing now that's such a priority for us to sit down, turn off the TV, get rid of distractions, and just really connect and talk. And that all started 9 years ago.
Yep. And so, so how many days a week would you say now? How many days a week do we sit down and do that? TV off, kids in bed, face to face for an hour or more.
Yeah, probably. I'd say about 5 days a week.
Yeah, I'd say so too.
Yeah.
So let's go back to one other thing that you mentioned, which is talking about your feelings and the roller coaster of that and how that can change on a dime.
Mm-hmm.
That was something that's really hard for me to get is empathy. And one of the character things that God had to develop in me was how to be present in your pain, feel your pain, be there, not be defensive, not try to let things bounce off, but to actually receive them.
Yeah.
And I think that was a big part of those early days where sitting and listening and trying to understand why you're feeling what you're feeling and how you could feel that was incredibly difficult. And I know that was frustrating for you, for me to not be able to get it.
But I do feel like at some point you did get it. And for, when I talk to wives, I would say one of the big things, so for men listening to this, I want you to hear this. Whenever you were able to empathize with me and when you were able to not be defensive, I feel like we really started to make a lot of progress. So I'm curious, how are you able to get to that place of like true empathy and truly feeling sorry and showing that to me, as well as not being defensive?
Hard question. I think it had to do with ownership, but it also had to do with reality of brokenness. Like so much of my posturing and defensiveness was trying to split hairs and say, oh, I did this, but not that. And, like you have a right to be angry for this, but not that. And I think it was about posturing, trying to save face. Like I didn't want to feel like as much of a monster as the data said that I was. And so for you to be angry about all the things you were angry about, it just activated all my shame. And rather than own that shame and just be present in the reality that this is how messed up and broken it is, I just kept wanting to push back and push back. I also wanted to make it out that you were catastrophizing. Like, you're making this out to be worse than it is. No, it was bad. It was really bad. And so I think finally there came to that point where I was just like, you know what? I'm a jerk. I've done really bad things that have really hurt you, and trying to save face is only hurting you more. I think it's important for guys to understand that for so many of us, for so many guys, like, we've been processing this up to the point of disclosure, and guys can really move on. I mean, so many guys can draw that line in the sand and say, look, the past is the past, the future is where we're going, so let's go. And wives cannot do that. You got to understand, if you're listening to this, the moment of disclosure, at that point, your past becomes her present. And so what husbands do is they say, you know, why do we have to talk about this? Why do we keep having to bring this up? Why do we have to have these conversations? Just trust me that things are going to be different going forward. And the reality is, wives can't do that. Wives have to process and make sense of all the things that led up to this point.
And I think the other big thing is, you know, whenever you told me everything, it's as if it had all happened that day.
Yes.
It's not that it had happened for the last 10 years, you know. It's
Right.
really, that was day one for me.
Right.
So.
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, I'm good. Is there anything else you're wanting to say?
Yeah, last thing I'll say is this. I think that it's... I think there's something to be said for the reality that it's just messy. Like, everyone's situation is different. The way it goes in those early days for everyone is different. And the way it went for us, it seems to be pretty ubiquitous. It's a pretty common story, but it's not the protocol or model. So for anyone listening, just know the way it looks at your house may be different than the way it looks at our house, but you have to have support, and you have to have the conversations about the really hard stuff.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks for joining us for another kitchen conversation.